Welcome. I'm Mike Fenton, President and CEO for the Association for Corporate Growth, ACG Toronto. Today I'm pleased to announce the launch of a new series called The Influencers, a leadership series featuring senior executives and personalities who have demonstrated vision and success across a variety of industry sectors, geographic markets, and with organizations from the SME category up to multinational enterprises. They continue to focus on innovation, growth, investment, and deal making. Joining us today is our chair of our board of directors, Ben Gibbons. Ben is the founder and managing partner of Waterpoint Lane, and he's got a few words for us. Ben?
Thanks, Mike. On behalf of our board of directors, thanks to everyone, ACG members, industry colleagues, sponsors, and speakers for joining us today. I would like to recognise an ACG member organisation, the Poirier Group, who has committed to support us as our first series sponsor. David Poirier is the founder and CEO of the Poirier Group, a boutique management consulting firm focused on strategy, execution, operational efficiency, and sustainable business transformations for clients across the retail, private equity, manufacturing, and healthcare sectors in North America. David will be moderating a conversation with our first influencer, John Ruffalo. I would now like to introduce John, who is the founder and managing partner of Maverick Private Equity. John's focus is on guiding the strategy of the firm, chair of the investment committee, and is deeply involved with sourcing and leading deal opportunities, particularly within the technology industry. John was also the founder of OMERS Ventures and the co-founder and vice chair of the Council of Canadian Innovators. Over the course of John's leadership as CEO, OMERS Ventures had invested over $500 million of capital in over 40 disruptive technology companies across North America, including growth investments in names that you will know, such as Shopify, Xanadu, Wattpad, Wave, and Hootsuite. Co-founded with Jim Basili, the Council of Canadian Innovators is a non-profit organisation dedicated to helping high-growth Canadian technology firms scale up globally. John also currently sits on the board of a number of leading innovative organisations, including AI Partnerships Corp, Engineering.com, Ether Capital, OneEleven and ArcTern Ventures, and Canopy Rivers. He is also a board member of a number of not-for-profit organisations, including the David Suzuki Foundation as vice chair. Wow, John is a busy guy. I would now like to pass over to David. David?
Thank you, Ben, and I'm really happy to be here today with John Ruffalo. John, really happy to have you here today and looking forward to this discussion. So it's been a while since we last caught up.
Yes, David, it has been.
Yeah, so could you share with us your career, and we'll get into some more details after that.
Well, David, just, it's funny, I'll go back to 20-ish years very briefly since, we've known each other when I was running the technology practice over at Deloitte. And one of the biggest concerns that I had was the lack of venture capital in the ecosystem to help these technology companies grow. And the problem started really around 2005 after the dot-com bust. By 2008, there was really no hope in it getting resurrected after the financial crisis. And there was an opportunity that was really triggered by the CEO of OMERS at the time, Michael Nobrega, who had asked me to help solve the problem by joining OMERS, and that's when I built OMERS Ventures. And at the time that I had joined, I was really trying to solve a series of problems. How do you finance companies really in three macro stages? And using revenues as a proxy. When they grow from zero revenue to $10 million, kind of one stage. Getting from $10 million to $100 million was really represented by a separate stage and series of challenges. And the third and final stage is when they get to about the $100 million revenue mark and getting them to $1 billion plus. And during the time that I was at OMERS Ventures, I really addressed the first two categories. I left OMERS to build in the third and final category to focus in on companies that are already at $100 million, and there are quite a few that really want to become global leaders. And right now, there is not the growth capital there, at least not in Canada, in order to enable that.
Right, and that's so. You've had several careers and,
Yes.
and different perspectives on,
Yeah.
on the Canadian marketplace and competing with American money as well.
Yes.
And I know you feel quite strongly about that, but what do you think the future's like for tech industry in Canada?
Well, the future, I think, from a long-term perspective, is extremely bright. 20 years ago, and I said this, and it still holds. This is the future of our country. It is not in resource extraction. It is not in manufacturing. A lot of the things that we did in the post-World War II industrial period, it is about innovation. It doesn't mean you have to be a technology company. So either you're building the technologies and selling them, or the other 90% of the economy, you're buying those technologies and embedding in your business to make your businesses bigger, faster, better, with greater customer insights. And in some respect, the whole notion of being a technology company will be greatly blurred, because in some respect, or in fact, it's part of our investment thesis, every company will have to be a technology company in some form. You're either producing it or you're utilizing it and creating your own moat. And if you're not, you will be out of business. And I think right now, particularly past the pandemic, it really accelerated that transition of the enabling technologies.
And tell us about Mavericks and how it came about, what your thoughts were in putting it together.
Sure. I mean, it really was based on that third and final stage of how do we get Canadian businesses to stay here and basically become globally relevant and really become a global multinational. They can certainly hire people from all around the world, but the creation of true wealth is based on companies staying here. In the post-World War II industrial period, we focused in on job creation. So whether those jobs were created by foreign-based multinationals or Canadian, it didn't matter, really. In the information revolution, that whole notion of jobs really is passé. Because the great thing about the jobs before, say, in the manufacturing sector is if there was manufacturing in Canada, it created an economic multiplier effect with the supply chain that was around it. Mm-hmm. So although you could argue that was a transitory wealth creation, it did create lots of jobs, particularly for folks in suburbs, et cetera, and it was a very powerful economic engine. That is gone now because there really is no supply chains in the digital economy. The supply chains are people, and those people are everywhere and can be remote. So you have to switch your focus away from job creation and think wealth and IP creation, which will attract the jobs. So you just kind of have to flip it on its head. And the problem in Canada was a lot of these innovative companies, particularly non-traditional technology companies, there really is not a funding source if you don't want to go public and if you don't want to be sold either by a strategic player or to a financial player. So the question really was, how do they get that capital for significant global growth? And the only other alternative that they can do is get just, conventional bank financing, which is absolutely fine. But if they really need significant capital, and again, they don't want to lose control of the business, this is the spot that Mavericks is built on. And there really is no capital that's exclusively focused to solve this problem. In the US, there is. And there's some very, very high quality firms, and those same US firms would be trolling the Canadian marketplace. The problem is, when you get significant foreign capital, there is pressure where you start to migrate the mind and management away from Canada because the market is not generally in Canada. And then you see this slow bleed of the senior executives end up where the capital is. And so, thinking through to the long term, that's probably not a good thing for Canada, because the real opportunity is those companies staying here, the senior executives largely being, the mind and management in Canada. The acquisitions are made by the Canadian company, and the great model is Shopify, and it's an incredible story, and I'm proud to be an investor in it. The question is, how do we do that 10, 20 more times?
Right, and along with that is this brain drain to the U.S. as well. I know I've been quite close with the University of Toronto engineering faculty.
Yes.
And we've seen so many bright young engineers being wooed away to Silicon Valley.
Yes. And it's an interesting conundrum, because I've spent a lot of time on the whole talent issue. There are folks that, no matter what, will be enticed to go to the United States, largely because dollars are far more significant because of the maturity of the companies, and as well, some folks just want to go to Silicon Valley. That's absolutely fine. The issue that we suffered, Dave, you remember this well, was that when there was not enough quality technology companies here in Canada, they had no choice but to go to the United States, because the choice was bad. Today, there's a multitude of choices. So we don't really see the folks leaving because they don't have any other choice. So that's been great news. The second opportunity that we have is the immigration of extremely well-trained innovation folks from other countries. I'd say the number one being India. And in some respects, due to the xenophobia in the United States, which has calmed down a little bit, but the undercurrents are clearly there. I have continued to see more and more people with diverse backgrounds that make a decision to say, you know what, I really want to work in the United States, but I don't feel so welcome there right now. And let me go to Canada, where I feel far more welcome, and I'm only a short flight away from the United States. I think that is an interesting pedal. And I've spent a lot of time with the Canadian federal government to make both temporary and permanent workers coming here far easier, because that is a resource that we desperately need.
Absolutely, and it's great to see you starting Mavericks with the intention of actually building the tech industry in Canada to be a global industry, rather than localized or a farm team for the U.S.
Yes, right, and and that is actually my big bugaboo. When folks get very excited to say, "Oh my God, look, a foreign-based company, usually U.S., is coming here." First thing they say is they were coming here to create jobs. Well, that is a bunch of malarkey. There is no company creating jobs in the innovation sector. There's a desperate need for more people, so those folks will be hired no matter what. So I welcome foreign-based companies coming here. What I don't welcome is government policy that entices foreign competition where they already have an economic advantage to pay people more, and then we hand them our taxpayer dollars to compete against Canadian-based companies that are still trying to grow, and puts them on an uneven playing field. That's where I point out on government policy to knock it off completely, because that is a old industrial policy that has to go out the window.
Right, and it did work in the manufacturing sector.
It did, yes. It absolutely worked fine there, and I would support that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in the innovation sector, and the thing that frustrates me from a public policy perspective is we keep on drawing from the same tool shed. That tool shed is gone, and it's now a digital tool shed, and your policy, your public policy frameworks are flipped on its head, and government hasn't caught up to understand the value of intellectual property, data, how markets are created in the digital world, regulatory frameworks, all very, very different and complicated and moving extremely fast. However, it's incumbent for us to help public policy folks in government to really understand that.
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
So, where do you think Mavericks is going to be, 5 or 10 years from now? You've built a phenomenal team and an amazing board. Tell us about that.
So here was the intention. I've had a long career, and it really never was about the money, and it still isn't. It really is. Is there a way that we can build a Team Canada, and surrounding ourselves with a bunch of eclectic folks who believe in the future of Canada, and many of the entrepreneurs who are our investors, but we surrounded ourselves with the greatest entrepreneurs in this country, like a Peter Gilligan, like a Jim Balsillie, the list goes on, Danny Reese, and all of these folks have built multi-billion-dollar organizations, are proudly Canadian, and it's incumbent on them to help build the next crew coming behind them. That's why they're part of Mavericks as well. And again, if we could all collectively do this and help these companies get bigger, faster, and stay here, that really is the future of our country. And so, in 10 years, from a Mavericks perspective, success would be, did we really help create multi-billion-dollar companies that have stayed here? That is the mark, and that is the goal that we're trying to achieve. And, success is there 10 or 20 more Shopifys?
That's amazing, just great, and I so bought into your notion. I'm going to do whatever I can to certainly
That's
help
great.
it as well. I'm glad we've got a partnership on that. Let's change gears a little bit. The last year has been a huge challenge for all of us, but in particular for John, and I think he is, for me, the model of perseverance. Tell us about what you've gone through. I think much of the audience have heard the challenges you've faced, but we'd love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, so certainly all of us have gone through COVID, and that was hard on a lot of folks. So I did get a double whammy in that during COVID, I took advantage of low traffic, people not going into the office by increasing my cycling. So I've been an avid cyclist for many, many years. And one of my great pleasures was in the middle of the week, I would do a much longer ride that I used to do on the weekends north of Toronto. And for 6 or 7 months, I had a regular route that would take me out of the city by going out of the east end of the city through the Toronto Zoo. And it is clear sailing from there. And the irony is, I developed my route to get out of the city because I don't like vehicles mixed with bicycles, and I'm extremely careful of how I navigate through the city. And I don't normally like riding my bike through the city of Toronto because I still think we're mixing bikes and cars, and the winner is always the car. And unfortunately, I learned the hard way. But the irony is, I was well north of the city in in my view, a country road that that you can go relatively quickly, but it's straight as an arrow. It's not it's not treed, so you can see from a very, very long straight distance. And I was doing my regular route to go from Toronto through to Stouffville. It was about a 100-kilometer route, and I was 5 kilometers away from my turning point when, out of the blue, I hear the sound of the air brakes of a very large truck right in my left ear. And I'm hugging the right side of the road like I normally do. And normally, if there's a truck, it just passes by you, or maybe it goes a little bit over to the center lane. My understanding is this truck went right into the opposite lane to get by me, not sure why. And then because there was oncoming traffic, as I understand it, came back into my lane, and it was too late. And by the time I heard it, to be honest, my first reaction is, who's the jackass right on my back tire? Because a lot of trucks, are dangerously close to bicycles. And before I could even react, I understand the truck slammed the brakes and jackknifed, and it was an 18-wheeler, and it was a flatbed, and it was that trailer that hit me in my back at 80 kilometers an hour. Took out 2 road signs, clean off. So I could imagine the impact that had. I felt the impact on my back, but before I could really feel it, it took me through the air, and I had a second trauma. So the first trauma was it exploded my vertebrae into dust, in my T12 vertebrae, which was gone. Actually, if you see the X-ray, it's actually gone. And then when I landed with such force on my right side that all of my ribs were broken in multiple places. In fact, my ribs stuck out and parts stuck in, which is called a flail segment, which prevents you from breathing, which is what all of the doctors I've spoken with don't understand, how I didn't suffocate to death. And I don't try to understand that either. But not only did it damage there, it split my pelvis into 6 pieces. And it was called an open book fracture. So think of a book falling on the ground, and you have the spine of the book kind of splitting. That's what happened to my pelvis when I landed on my side. And then I basically damaged all of my organs, and I lost 50% of my blood. So just the list goes on and on. So it was a pretty traumatic double injury. And what I can't understand, and neither of the doctors, is I should have been dead on impact, but I woke up about 2 minutes after impact, according to witnesses. And my first instinct was to try to get up, and I remember using my left arm trying to get up, but I noticed I had no feeling below my waist, and I couldn't get up not knowing that everything is damaged in my body. They told me to stay down. They grabbed my phone that was in my kit in my back, and I remember them asking me, "Do you want us to call anybody?" And my wife was up in Collingwood at the time, and I said, "Yes, I'd like to call my wife." And so then they asked me, "Oh Jesus, I can't use your Face ID on the password. Can you give us your password?" So here I am. I'm actually literally dying, giving my password, and then giving my wife's phone number and screaming to my wife, "Come and get me. This one is bad." She's seen many of my accidents before, and she kind of goes, "Oh, here he goes again." And by virtue of me yelling, she thought, well, how bad can it possibly be? But she had no idea that as I'm yelling at her, I'm actually dying. And what was remarkable was paramedics came and the ambulance came all within 10 minutes. And the thing that I clearly remember, and they were wonderful, they said, "We need to roll you on your back." Now, everything is shattered in my body, but I can feel everything. And I remember them turning over on my back, and the pain of that was something unimaginable. And they made the right decision in not calling the helicopter, because under normal circumstances, they would have got the helicopter and transported me to Sunnybrook because of the trauma. But that would take over an hour by the time the helicopter comes, gets me in, etc. Right. So they made a right decision to say, we're going to drive you, because it's only 25 minutes to Sunnybrook. And all I remember is feeling every single bump on the road on my back. And it was the worst 25-minute ride. And then the moment I got to Sunnybrook, you know, when you see the emergency sign, I saw it, I looked up at it, and people came rushing out, and they dropped a gas mask on me, and that was the last thing I remember.
Wow, incredible. And I think, you know, surviving that is just an incredible feat. But since then, and many of you know that John was an avid cyclist. Few of you know that he still is an avid cyclist.
I'm trying.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So after I had 3 surgeries, and they couldn't do surgery for me, by the way, for 36 hours. There was 2 reasons. They thought that another surgery would cause a 3rd trauma to my body, and there's no way that my body could take it. And they thought that I would die within the first 48 hours anyways. So they didn't tell my wife, but they told my business partner, and he was in shock. And so they were just waiting for me to pass. And I didn't. And they did the surgery, and they did tell me once the intubation was taken out, we're sorry, but you'll never ever walk again. And boy, when you hear those words, it's a punch to the gut. I won't tell you what I said when they left the room. It basically was, go F yourself, not being personal, but don't dare tell me something like that, even though in my mind I'm kind of wondering, Jesus, how do I deal with that? And my legs started turning on, but just the muscles that were related to my cycling. So my spinal cord remembered all of my cycling. So what basically almost killed me is what's bringing me back from a recovery perspective, far beyond anyone's expectations. So I guess, let's see here, about 7 months after the accident, I started getting back onto my Peloton. And it was a nightmare. There was a special strap that went right across my body, holding my bum in place on the seat as I'm sliding off, and it was strapped onto the handlebars, so I'm kind of I'm not going to move. My wife was behind my bum, watching that I don't slide backwards, forwards, and I had 2 physios on each foot, turning the pedal as I'm screaming of the agony that I'm going through. And they'd be like, "Oh my God!" I go, "No, just keep on going. Ignore my screaming." And I was able to to pedal with their help at 1 kilometer an hour, and I kind of paused and go, "God damn, this is going to be way harder than I thought." And I didn't do it again for a couple of weeks because I was like, I'm not going to go through that again. But I got back on and the pain went down. And I started to realize that every time I cycled, the pain was decreasing. And now, 7 months after that, I'm on my Peloton. If anyone wants to go in there, you could look for Black T-shirt guy. I do it generally an hour, and I've hit 19 kilometers now. And although I used to be in the top 1 or 2% of riders, I'm now in the top, 85 to 90%, and slowly getting back. And the irony is, I could cycle using my legs, and I can't walk independently, but I can cycle. And now I have a recumbent bike where I'll cycle outdoors, particularly up north, and I'll go on to trails. But I'll cycle from some of my nearby towns where I live, and I'm going back to the cycling coffee shops and starting to get my routine back. But it is the cycling that is helping me with my walking, with my standing, and it really is about neuroplasticity and my brain trying to reconfigure my wiring to allow my messages to get through to my legs and back. And it's very much slowly working.
Amazing, amazing. And, that's what I meant by the perseverance and determination. So if anybody has any doubts about whether John's going to be successful in walking or in changing the technology landscape in Canada, it's absolutely going to happen. Just incredible. What would you say to young individuals entering the venture capital world? What advice would you have for them?
Well, a lot of folks do contact me who love the venture capital industry and ask, well, how do I get in here? And my most common comment is, go out and get an operating role in a startup so you could understand from the inside out. And it doesn't matter what role you have, whether it's on the product development side, product marketing, it doesn't really matter. But there's two main reasons why startups, particularly in the technology world, there is a distinct culture in there, and it's hard to explain this culture, but it is different than working in a large, more traditional enterprise. And understanding the culture, but also understanding, a particular function in a startup gives you the credibility so that, once you get some of those chops under your belt, the financial aspects of being a venture capitalist are not that complicated. And unlike in private equity where financial modeling becomes far more prevalent, in the venture world, it's really understanding what this product can be, and really using your imagination and trying to identify the proof points to determine whether this business might be very successful. But what I tell most folks, the real core competency of a venture capitalist is a pattern recognition expert. And that only comes with seeing constant deal flow and learning fast. And you start to really identify, oh, wow, here's this company here. I thought this was a great company. Oh my God, but look at this company here. And you start to develop patterns that might be a predictor for success. But I'd say more importantly, the pattern recognition helps you triage those that you don't think have a pattern for success. And generally speaking, that's usually 90% of the companies that you see, you immediately would be able to say, it's a fine business, but it's not going to be a very scalable business. And then you just focus in on that last 10%. So that pattern recognition allows you to probably drop that first 90% very, very quickly. And with that remaining 10%, it becomes increasingly harder to really figure out what might be the winner. But in venture capital land, it's not about identifying a particular winner, interestingly. It's about portfolio construction. And it's about investing in a basket of companies to hopefully pick this group. And if one of them, and two would be beautiful, but if there's even one of them that is a massive outlier, it covers the losses from all of the other ones. And this is why you generally need a pool of capital, and why it's harder to be an angel when you're just trying to cherry pick the winners. Extremely difficult to do.
John, one last question. Let's talk about the tech sector and what you see happening in Canada in the future. It's been a good run so far.
Yes. I mean, it's been an incredible run, and so I am very long-term optimistic, specifically on the technology sector. But like every other industry, it goes through its cycles. This latest cycle, this last 10-year run of incredible market returns, I do think we're at peak. And why is that? This last run was really triggered by the technologies that were really all crossed the chasm in 2008. And this was cloud computing, mobility first, and social. And 2008, it was a magical year where although all these technologies started at different times and matured differently, they kind of collided and exploded on the marketplace. And it coincidentally exploded in one of the worst times in the 2008-ish financial crisis. But that gave rise to a number of entrepreneurs, and once they got through this crisis, 2011 was the first year really, and we call it the first vintage year of investing in venture capital. And that has been an unbelievable run. But like every run, it moves with the next real technologies that give rise to creative destruction. And there's a couple of outstanding technologies that I'll give an example that are still finding its way. The blockchain, where right now all of the money's largely been made on speculation of the currency. And we're seeing a little bit in the NFT market, but really it's still at its early days. And I would say quantum is another big one. So just two examples. Those two, even though people are placing bets on those two, really haven't been unleashed. And when they do, it will create that next set of creative destruction. So I think right now, and it was part of the thesis behind Mavericks as well too, I am so proud to have been an early adopter or early believer in venture capital in Canada, but it runs its course temporarily. And I started to see way too much capital chasing far too few deals. And the pricing has gone up to astronomical levels. Now, great for the entrepreneur, by the way, and if they could exit in this time period, it's unbelievable. But what ends up happening is that the expectations have gone up so astronomical, and I can't remember the exact stat, but 2 years ago, thereabouts, there were a handful, I think it was like a couple of unicorns in Canada, and now there's 38. Well, there's 38 because they've been anointed on that, because somebody decided that through evaluation they're going to be deemed a unicorn. But what's happened is valuations have gone up. That will follow with expectations going up to astronomical levels. Now, there is one advantage of being a crotchety old guy. I've seen every cycle over the last 30 years, and Dave, you were with me on that last bad cycle in 2000, 2001, and it's eerily similar. Different problems. A lot of those had companies that had no revenues, but it was the same thing. Way too much capital chasing too few deals. I see that now. It cannot continue. I do believe that once governments stop printing money, which the U.S. has finally started to taper their bond buying program, and these interest rates that you're seeing, the inflation, it's not transitory. This is a systemic change, which it should be in inflation. What does that do? That increases interest rates. That will start to move money back out of very speculative investing back to some more conservative stuff. And I do believe the pump is all primed, where we'll see a return back to more historical levels. But again, through it, we'll see these incredible next wave of technologies just do it again, and then the new wave will be created.
And what sort of timing do you think? Since we're looking into your crystal ball,
Yeah,
I'll push
yeah.
you even further on this.
So one thing is for sure, my timing is always wrong. I actually predicted 5 years ago that it would have been mid-2020. And it was done for demographic reasons and where the supplies of capital were. So I am already a year off. But if you follow what various governments are doing, and inflation is everywhere in every major country, some countries are already starting to use monetary policy. There is very strong rumors, and there's a huge debate in the United States to increase interest rates, which will influence Canada. When that happens, and a lot of folks think that will happen sometime mid next year, it's still not enough of an increase to have a real impact, but the question will be, as the rates start to raise, will it start to create a lack of confidence and fear? And as you know very, very well, the markets only move by greed and fear. Greed takes a fair long time to go up. Fear, bang, hits. When that fear starts, I think it'll be a cliff. And anyone or any companies that are really not wearing its clothes will be exposed. And those companies that are really solid companies actually will benefit ultimately through this.
And that's going to have an impact on the housing market as well.
Housing in particular. When Canada did its stress tests, and I might be off a little bit, but a 200 basis increase in interest rates, which historically is nothing. But when interest rates are at 2%, it's a doubling of the interest rate. It's a doubling of people's mortgage payments. And right now, if it increases by 200 basis points, 75% of Canadians cannot meet their mortgage payment. And remember when the U.S. housing market got askew? It's now back in line. Canada is one of the most skewed countries that have the greatest debt versus the rise of the value of their properties. And we've been hearing these warnings, but the thing that I fear is people haven't been focused in on debt. They focus in on monthly payments. And when that payment increases, and now they start to realize, uh-oh, my value of my house is dropping and I have this massive mortgage, will it create a selling pressure? And that will have that same impact on the financial markets as well.
I know we're both wishing that the government would make the proper steps to at least have a smooth slowdown of the economy.
I think that's what they're really trying to do. But when inflation is hitting 5%, the problem is the average Canadian is paying more for their goods and services, and yet if they have savings, their savings in essence is depreciating, even if it's just staying the same and not spending it. So you actually become less economically well off if we allow inflation to take hold. And I think this is where governments, for the first time in years, are really needing to focus in on monetary policy. And it's, I can get you half of why you should increase, and I can give you the support for the other half that exactly tells you why it's a bad, it's a poor reason to increase rates. But so I think there's lots of debate going on right now.
Yeah, well, you're going to be at least half right.
Yes, we'll be right at one point, but I'm not going to predict an exact date.
Well, I want to thank you so much, John, for this time. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful getting together again and having this chance to chat, sharing your thoughts with the audience as well. So on behalf of ACG, really appreciate you leading off this influencer series.
Great. Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you, ACG.
Before you go anywhere, we're going to go to the Q&A section now, and I encourage you to write your questions in the drop-down menu, and we'll be right back.
Well, here we are in the Q&A section. So thank you, John, for sticking with us for this. And we already have a number of questions, but I encourage you all to write in any questions. And we'll get to them as best we can. John, one of the very first questions that came in after you shared your story was, how has the cycling accident changed your outlook on life and work? And we'll have to keep the answer to less than half an hour, I think, but it could go on for a while.
I would say, certainly from a life perspective, when people do say the small things count, that's something that I have a greater appreciation for. So being able to walk on a beach again, and just feel the sand on my toes is an aspiration for me. Never mind trying to go to the fanciest and most secluded beaches in the world and have luxury vacations or, those sorts of things. Yeah, all of that stuff, although it didn't really matter to me, I thought, those were things that checked the boxes on. And now it just doesn't come across my mind right now. And being with my friends and family is really just the most important thing to me right now, in addition to my work obligations.
That's leads to another interesting question that came in, which is, how do you maintain your focus given the amount of long-term recovery you have and the amount of energy that takes as well.
Yeah, the energy aspect is a great point. The amount of energy that it takes for me to do physio is quite intensive. So, I'll give you another example. Being on the bike, so like Peloton, and I like to do an hour on the Peloton, and when that hour is done, I'm completely. Whereas the equivalent of that 1 hour would be me riding for 4 hours, beforehand. So, I do have to watch the amount of my energy burn, just because you are still getting the same energy burn that you had before, a fraction of the amount of the work for it. So if you try to do something that you thought before, my God, I could have done something, without stopping, it actually has an impact, to my body, because my body is just working so hard just to do the simplest of tasks.
I'm finding that I just had a birthday. I'm starting to feel that way every day too. Not to the same extent, for sure.
Yeah, the good news is that I did have somewhat limitless energy before the accident. I do now have a defined amount, but it is still a relatively high bank of energy that I have now. So it's still it might be viewed still as high from a comparison perspective.
Yeah, for sure. I know that to be true. Here's a different question. So what business decision left a powerful lesson of what not to do in the future?
That's an interesting question. I would say to you, and it was more with age. I would say before I would on profit maximization of a particular activity or thing. And what I have learned over, if you do the right thing and stick to your knitting, the money, if that's what you so choose to motivate you, will come afterwards. But when you flip it around, I do find that that profit or maximization, that's the first thing that comes out of your mind, actually leads you in many cases to making the wrong ultimate decision. And it actually isn't profit maximization, really. You think it is, but really over the long term, you tend to sub-optimize, particularly where events occur that you did not anticipate, that actually get in the way of achieving that profit maximization objective, and then you quickly make a decision and say, you know what, I'm out of here, without realizing that there is no straight line decision, particularly in the investment world, but rather there's a series of dots, and you have to kind of figure out, are those dots actually leading me to the right path or taking me on a different path?
And as I think back through our numerous conversations over the decades, I've always heard you talk about value creation versus profit maximization as a focus. So this is something that's not new to you.
Yes. It just became far more clear to me over the years, and it was largely based on the volume of mistakes I have made and agonizing, why did I make those decisions? And I just started to see a path of my suboptimal decision making habits.
Yeah, I now know what my father meant by wisdom of the ages.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And so do GPs like you, this is another question that came in, like Mavericks, need to convince LPs that you require 10 plus years to tackle big societal issues like climate and poverty?
If the question is really from an investment holding perspective, when an investment let me answer that question in a bit of a different spin. When an investment opportunity is so obvious, your risk reward trade-off is likely very low, meaning that yeah, your risk is very low, particularly where it's such an obvious investment to everyone else. But what it also means is that your ability to drive outsized returns is also very low, because in many respects, in order to beat the average, you can't make a decision that everyone else would make. And so when there is more complex investing, like in climate change, it will likely have greater risk, greater timelines, but in many cases, changes the world at the same time. So I think what's happening now is a lot of LPs are starting to realize, this formula of making an investment and trying to get out in 5 years and getting your money back really are not investments that, will have those substantive returns. And what the truth of the matter is that the time frames are actually much longer, and you're starting to see a bigger and bigger trend of GPs actually saying, we're making investments for long-term holds. One such firm in Toronto is called Altus, and that is really what their thesis is. And they're arguing that, I'm going to let you know right up front that this is not a less than 10-year investment, but over the life of you holding this investment, your returns on average are going to be higher than a shorter term investment. And I think that thesis, I think the truth of the matter is that thesis is really what the truth has been for a long time. And I think some GPs are coming out and just simply admitting the truth and being transparent with their LPs.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, your organization is relatively new. You've just entered the market, and you've had to build a foundation from nothing for that. Other than obviously your reputations and the trusts. So, what foundation did your company create in order to establish and retain trust with your stakeholders?
I am not a first-time fund manager, so I've been in the business for many years. This is a first-time team, so we kind of get in the gray. But I think right now, in this investing environment, where asset prices are just generally very high, and some would say in certain segments, stratospherically high, that makes no economic sense. In times like this, I do think that investors or LP investors recognize that this is both the best of times and the worst of times, and they do try to look for seasoned investors who don't panic, who don't have a fear of missing out, sticking to their knitting and making sure that when the time to make a deal makes sense, to make the deal. Things could change on a dime in this sort of market. I think, David, you and I have talked about this. I believe that this inflation is is not transitory. And just yesterday, the U.S. Fed chair finally said that they're going to remove the word transitory in front of the word inflation. Exactly what I've been saying for 3 months. And I think that politics is getting in the way of this. And there is real inflation, and there will likely be a movement of interest rates. What does this all happen? If the right things come at the same time, it will mean a very, very quick correction in the markets that would be probably pretty severe. And it's just reverting back to where it probably should have been as opposed to where it is today. And so if you're not careful in this sort of a market, you can get caught with some very, very significant losses that you can't recover from. This is the sort of environment where sophisticated investors want to invest with a sophisticated team who is really watching out on the macroeconomic activity of the world. And this is something that we spend a lot of our time on. But this is something that our whole team believes in what we followed. And I think that comes through when sophisticated dollars are chatting with us.
Yeah, and boy, if we could pinpoint that timing.
Yeah, well, that's the only part I can figure out. But man, every day that timing seems to accelerate, and the comments yesterday seem to imply that the interest rates from the U.S. Are going to rise faster, and they've talked about tapering their bond buying program even faster because they're starting to get worried on inflation versus the return to employment numbers. And I haven't heard that comment in months.
Yeah, signs to watch for sure. Changing topics a little bit. How do you keep a strong mental attitude when the going gets tough and not giving up?
Yeah, I mean, this is always a challenge, and at least I can speak for me personally, and this applies, to business life as well. Everybody's entitled to bad days. So, I have good days, I have bad days. The real question is, when you have a bad day, do you still look forward to the next day being potentially a good day? Is really the way how I think about it. And, again, me physically, there's a lot of things that today I can't do. But there's way more things that I can do like I've done before. So what I really try to do is separate the two and to really zero in on those things that I can do. Now, let me apply this into my work time. My work time is more limited than normal, largely because of my commitments to physio. So I've made a decision early on that I'm going to really focus in on 3 things. And those 3 things are the 3 things that not only do I likely best do on the team vis-a-vis the rest of the team, but I think I do as well as anybody. But there's 1,000 things that I don't do better than anyone, and I make sure that I don't spend any time on that. And what I've discovered is my efficacy on the 3 things that I do very, very well shoots right up through the roof because I don't focus in on all of the other stuff. So it's kind of like the same thing with my physical self. I do focus in on the things that I can do. Yeah, I can't walk, but I can cycle, and I'm cycling faster and faster and faster. So I'm focusing on the cycling until hopefully one day I'll be able to walk. It's the same kind of thinking.
Yeah, it's great lessons there for all of us. Changing gears again, somebody asked, how do you access funding when you're a small operation?
It's very, very tough. I did have the advantage that I've been, in the business and develop relationships, but I would say that on the outset, it looked like that I was able to get my funding in a very, very short period of time. The truth of the matter, it took me 30 years to get my funding. And that's the truth, I think, for a lot of businesses. When, a lot of folks, particularly younger folks, ask me for advice in their fundraising. And I'm like, okay, so let's go through all the folks that you know and you've networked with. Well, I don't know anybody. And I look at them saying, so you think on a standing start that someone is going to give you money that has no idea who you are, and they're going to simply trust you just because you say it so. And I think this is the problem for folks starting all businesses. You really do, particularly if you're the founder of the business, you really do have to get engaged with your relevant community very, very early on. And in particular, getting engaged with your ecosystem when you don't need people. And that is the best time to build relationships. In fact, if you can, build it when they need you, and you offer your value, whatever you can offer when they need you. And the one thing, and we mentioned this earlier, why I love Canada so much, it is a country really based on relationships at the end of the day. And, David, you and I go back, 20 years, and every time we see each other, we just pick up where we left off. Well, we trust one another. And, when we decide to do business with one another, we, if it fits, we just do it. We don't know who one another is, then you start spending a lot of time trying to figure out the other person. And you get kind of worried of, am I going to be made look like a fool? What do I really know about this particular person, etc.? Well, it's the same thing on fundraising. If you as an entrepreneur plan to be fundraising in a year or 2 years from now, it's what you do today is going to create the framework for success a year or 2 years from now. If the first time you're meeting people is today and you're fundraising today, your odds of success are extremely low.
Good. John, people are listening carefully and taking notes. So the question just came in. What are those 3 things that you're really good at in terms of your fund?
The 3 things are fundraising, attracting deal flow largely through I call it broadly marketing, but kind of what we're just doing today, because I do like it a lot. And then the third thing is really the strategy of the firm and where are we going and how we can create the greatest firm possible. Those are really the 3 things that I spend just about all of my time on.
And that leads to this next question that just came in. How are you influencing the next generation of entrepreneurs, particularly the generation with limited experience with life lessons, resiliency, passion, staying strong in the face of challenges?
Well, I think the second part of that question really says it all. I'm just thinking about from an entrepreneurial perspective, and what I do when I first meet them is to really understand why are they doing with what they're doing, and what is the problem that they're really trying to solve, and why is it a problem. if the problem is defined by their ability to end up with a fantastic exit at the end of the day, it's not very interesting to me. But if somebody wants to create the next Alzheimer's drug because they've had a parent that had early onset Alzheimer's, and they're going to go through all ends of the earth to solve that problem, that's the sort of passion that I think is important for folks to get through all of the hurdles and obstacles that you're going to face. And 99.99% of the time, those obstacles land right in front of you and sometimes right on top of your head. And if you don't have that passion to solve that problem, you are going to stop and you're going to say, this is too hard and I'm going to try something else that just doesn't require that level of effort. And I think that is part of the problem. And so when entrepreneurs are really thinking about building a business, you really have to be honest with yourself to really understand what is it that really turns your crank. And one of the great stories and investments that I've made was in Shopify. And when Toby Lutke told me the story of when they built a snowboard shop and his job was to find the software in order to sell it online to his friends, and was quite astonished that there wasn't any software that was off the shelf, but you actually had to go hire a consulting firm to customize it. Well, he just thought that is just absolutely wrong. And he viewed himself, like many of the other small and medium-sized business owners, as artisans. And he just thought that an artisan should be able to sell their wares anywhere in the world and not be restricted by having distribution arrangements or going through several series of middlemen. And that same passion lives with him today. And that's what drives Shopify, and it's always ever present. That's a good example of something that no matter what was going to get into Toby's way, he was going to find a solution around it.
Perseverance and drive, right? And passion. Which sector in the Canadian mid-market do you believe will have the strongest growth in the next 3 to 5 years?
Where I think it's going to come from is, so in the last 10 years, we've had the most dramatic growth in the technology sector. And it just, continues to explode. But let's just say that the technology sector as classically defined, which is basically providing the tool sets for other industries in order to get them more productive. But let's say the technology sector accounts for 10% of Canada's GDP. Well, how is innovation impacting the other 90% of GDP? And what I think we are seeing, and we're in the middle of it in very, very early innings, is the crossing of the chasm of technology to those more traditional industries. And they will have to embrace technology in order to make their businesses cheaper, faster, better. And if they choose not to, that's fine. They just won't be in business anymore. And so in many respects, every company is going to look like a technology company. But those companies that were viewed as, a traditional incumbent are really going to fight back against a lot of the technology companies that were built from a tech stack perspective first. And they're going to fight back based on their expertise in that particular industry. And I think this is going to be the greatest creative destruction that we're going to see in a generation. And frankly, our firm Mavericks is really predicated on this transfer of technology to traditional industries. And I think that is going to be fascinating to watch for the next 10 years.
So it's really going to be innovation that's driving it rather than technology that's driving it.
Correct. You're absolutely right. When somebody says technology, I view that more in the narrow sense, and I view that in the tool set sense. But it's innovation that's going to end up winning. And when you think about innovation, people are going to innovate by using technology in order to increase their productivity. That is going to be the innovation. And it could be business model innovation, but largely it's really the effectiveness of your execution and building your moats around that effectiveness. And we really haven't seen that. And I'd say, certain of the industries have already been fighting back. And the first ones in Canada that I saw truly starting to fight back were the Canadian banks. And that was really my impetus to start to observe and say, oh, wow, they're not standing still whatsoever. And if you look at the Canadian banks from 5 years ago to today, I don't have the exact stats, but I would love to know what is the percentage of technology workers that work for a bank today versus 5 years ago. And I think I will be very surprised at how astounding that difference might be.
Yeah, certainly the amount of executive C-suite focus and attention on technology now has grown enormously over the last 5 years as well.
Yep.
Who's doing the most to help create the next entrepreneurial leaders in Canada?
Who is doing the most? Wow. I don't know if there's anyone doing the most, but I can tell you the biggest observational difference I've seen in over 10 years. So when I graduated, which was, 100 years ago, we were, or at least I felt the pressure to be a professional. Being a professional was really the measure of success. And that was largely being an accountant, lawyer, engineer, and an entrepreneur was nowhere near the top. In fact, I remember in my class, there was one person in my entire graduating class that said he was going to be an entrepreneur. And you know what my reaction was? It was, yeah, good for you, because nobody was ever going to hire you anyways. And that was my impression. And, when and you look, it kind of moved from the professionals, and it kind of went more to investment banking or the consulting industry. But today, it's the kids want to graduate and be entrepreneurs. My son, who is 16 years old, wants to be an entrepreneur. I'm kind of shocked. I tried everything, try to figure out what the heck is this guy like, and all of a sudden, I guess he's been hearing me talk about entrepreneurialism, and he's got the bug, and it just stuns me. And so what's happened? A lot of the universities, 10 years ago, I may be wrong, but I can't remember if there was an entrepreneurial program. If there was a handful. Now every university has entrepreneurship. Now high schools have it, and this is fascinating to watch. And who's pushed this? Societal demand, realizing that entrepreneurialism is really going to dictate the future of this country and really be the wealth driver of this country. So it's a bit of a hokey answer, but I just say societal push in recognizing the value of entrepreneurialism, which has been really at the top of the pecking order in the United States. The entrepreneurs in the United States have largely, over the last 30 years, always been viewed as the top of the pecking order, but it wasn't the same thing in Canada, not the same thing in the UK and many other countries, but it's shifted. And I find that as the most fascinating shift that I've seen over the course of my entire career.
Yeah, and ironically, I've seen the pandemic as being the mechanism which has pushed entrepreneurship in Canada faster than anything I can think of for the last decade.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've seen some of the folks that I worked with, and they were employed by other companies and have made the decision to build their own companies and feel not only far more secure, where at the beginning they had lots of anxiety, but they now feel so much more secure and making so much more money, not realizing that they should have done this years ago. And it is interesting when you ask someone, and I'd say this is more of my general experience, how do you like being an entrepreneur? Most responses are, I wish I did it earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got way more questions than we can fit into the last few minutes here, but how can traditional PE firms invest in technology-centric businesses without compromising on their historical risk-return parameters?
If they don't do it, their risk return parameters are already falling apart, because every business is going to be a technology business. So I welcome those that choose not to, because I'll eat their lunch. And they're already seeing that, at least this is a Canadian phenomenon, not in the United States. The venture worlds and the buyout private equity worlds have largely stayed separate. And, our thesis really is really the hybrid of the two. You better understand technology, but you better understand the business in which you're seeking to invest, because the two will be coming together. And I think that is a prelude to how all investors will need to understand, or they'll be lousy investors.
And last quick question, are there one, two, or three things you can think of that the government can do to help entrepreneurship and technology in Canada so we have Canadian-based global businesses?
Yeah, through the Council of Canadian Innovators, this is an organization that Jim Balsillie and I had co-founded. There's really three pillars: access to capital, access to talent, and access to customers and markets. It's that last one is the hardest one. This is the area of really trying to help companies scale dramatically, largely through new markets that they haven't been in before, competing in markets that are controlled by intellectual property, and making sure that your property is equally defensible, understanding the power of data, looking at bilateral or multilateral trade arrangements, this very sophisticated view in understanding how global markets operate. And the countries in the world that do this best are the United States and China. And why is that? Their respective governments are really weaponizing their own companies that are in their own jurisdiction, and putting policies into place from a governmental perspective to give their companies an advantage. And frankly, it's very blatant. The days of Canada sitting back and acting like Boy Scouts, where we say, oh, no, we believe in free trade. Oh, no, we believe in free markets. That has never been true. We get told that by other countries, but they're not abiding by that. So our public policy leaders need to really understand that there's a whole new world out there, and those weapons are being fired like crazy. And Canada right now is mostly standing by and watching other countries duke it out. And we need to make a choice from a Canadian perspective. Do we allow other countries to duke it out and see our Canadian-based companies just fall by the wayside? Or do we get into the arena with them and give our folks a chance? And I think that's the biggest thing that we're really trying to help governments understand, at least in this country.
Absolutely. And John, we've run out of time, but this has been so terrific. Really appreciate your time with ACG. And for those of you in the audience, I really appreciate you tuning into this. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks again, John, so much. And back to Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks to John for providing some interesting comments into your personal and corporate career, and also the amazing recovery that you're currently undertaking after your accident. We appreciate your honesty and your insights into the future of the marketplace. And David, we thank you for your participation as our moderator today and for facilitating a fascinating discussion. For all of our attendees, the session has been recorded and it will be available for you to review later this month for a limited time. You'll also receive a copy of the attendee list and also an update on our next session of the Influencers, which will take place on January the 20th. And our guest at that date will be Jim Pattison, Chairman and CEO of the Pattison Group. This program will be hosted in person and will have a limited capacity. I'd now like to thank our digital agency partner, Human Contact, and their OMERS platform, which we're using to present this program today. To learn more about OMERS and how their technology can enrich your company's community and connection, check out the short video below and links to their websites. For any companies interested in the series, we're now actively discussing category-exclusive sponsorships as we develop the program in 2022. I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation, and we look forward to seeing you at the next installment of The Influencers.